Good. Hello, everybody. Hello, Le Ha.
Hi, hello everyone. Hello Joe. How are you?
I'm great. How are you going?
I think I'm feeling great too. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Me too. Me too. So, my name's Joel Windle. I'm a member of faculty at Fluminense Federal University in Rio de Janeiro, and also at the University of South Australia. And I'm here on behalf of the Association of Applied Linguistics in Brazil, speaking with Le Ha Phan, who is a senior professor at the University Brunei Dar es Salaam. And she is a former colleague of mine at Monash University in Australia. She has also taught at the University of Hawaii, and she is originally from Vietnam. So welcome, Le Ha.
Hi, thanks Joe. Yes, I think we've known each other for a long time, right? Yeah, history. Yes.
We have a long history, yeah, and we've had many interesting conversations about some of the topics we're going to talk about tonight, particularly the connection between language, power, and identity for scholars in the Global South.
Yes, a lot, definitely.
Le Ha, maybe you could start off just telling us a little bit about your current work setting in Brunei and how you arrived there.
Well, so I am, yes, as Joe has mentioned, I'm originally from Vietnam, and I have been living and working outside of Vietnam for the past 20 years. And so I arrived in Brunei in the mid of 2018 while I was still with the University of Hawaii at Manoa. So in Brunei, I am affiliated with the Sultan Hassana Bolkiah Institute of Education, and I am also the the head, or you call the lead of the Comparative and International Education Research Group. And I have been doing a lot of work with colleagues here and internationally on on my passion interests, which include language, pedagogies, and identity, as well as academic mobilities, particularly in the global south these past few years. So I have been doing a lot of work on that, on those areas. So I think I would love to chat with you more if you are interested in any of those.
Fantastic. And Le Ha, I know you've maintained connections in Vietnam and you run a conference there involving many other scholars who work on Vietnam or are from Vietnam. Could you share some of your thoughts about the Vietnamese diaspora and young academics in Vietnam, what kind of issues they're looking at?
Okay, yeah. So thanks for mentioning it. So I think probably around 2008, 2009, when I was still at Monash, with you those days, I initiated, the Engaging with Vietnam conference series. So I wanted to create a dialogue, or I would say a space for knowledge production where I would be able to bring together scholars interested in Vietnam from everywhere, regardless of background, of nationality, ethnicity, religion, or political, viewpoints. I just wanted to bring everyone together to engage in different questions of knowledge production. And and I was very, and yes, and actually it was wonderful that we attracted a lot of scholars interested in education and language issues. And over the years, I would say over the past the past decade, I've seen many Vietnamese scholars based in Vietnam, yes, as well as Vietnamese diasporic scholars coming together and actually, you know, engage in really, really fascinating as well as very complicated issues about language and education, as well as a transformation and change is taking place in Vietnam, and a lot of original and exciting work has been produced by, you know, by Vietnamese scholars. So we can say that you know, the engagement in Vietnam has seen so many new voices. And yeah, I mean, so I can give you an example of such, you know, some original work. So for example, you know, the internationalization of higher education in Vietnam, as well as the rise of English medium instruction in our educational system, and as well as, you know, of course, the pros and cons of those changes, as well as, you know, what kind of transformation as well as obstacles that have presented Vietnamese learners as well as Vietnamese teachers and institutions, you know, with opportunities and with, you know, and with actually many critical issues that probably were not taken into consideration as much before. For example, the cultural politics of English and the neoliberal dimension of English medium instruction, right? Things like that have started to become more and more present in a lot of new scholarship produced by Vietnamese scholars that I've seen, and also you know, I've seen in publication as well as in presentation over the years at, you know, in the Engaging with Vietnam conference series that I mentioned.
Yeah, so I guess that's a dilemma that many Brazilians working in language education are facing as well. The historic dominance of the native speaker and now the idea of the native speaker as a racialized identity, and as you know, English, the way English has been taught and thought about as connected to a narrow range of identities and competency as tied to those. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that issue about those connections between language and identity and native speakerism?
So I mean, I think we can comment on those issues, right, beyond Vietnam, right? Doesn't have to be focusing on Vietnam,
Yes,
right?
of course.
So I think over the years I've seen different, I would say I've seen competing discourses about those in you know, it would say the intersection of language, identity, and critical issues. And as you say, you know, the question of native speakers, who count as native speakers, right? And you know, so and I've seen a lot of, I would say, gray spaces. Of course, so let's say, you know, with the increasing popularity of English, I would say, as you know, not necessarily, you know, the popularity of English doesn't necessarily come without any resistance. But I must say that a lot of government policy, institutional policies have made it a lot easier for English to become more and more popular and in demand. So in many contexts around the world. And at the same time, you see many international schools, you know, offering students and their parents opportunity to study at the kindergarten level, so fully in the medium of English. So a lot of young students, you know, they grow up being completely fluent in English, probably together with other languages, and then so that then you can then it's very hard to say that they are not native speakers of English. They are native speakers of English, but so I think then that kind of reality really adds a lot of complexity to the already very complicated discussion of native speakerisms, and and of course, as you mentioned before, the racialized identities of who ought to be or who should be considered authentic native speakers of English. So I think all of those new changes in many contexts that I've seen really make it so difficult. And I would call the gray areas that invite probably more attention from scholars.
Yeah. Okay. And just, I guess, on the same issue about how people view or appropriate different cultural identities and types of knowledge, can you tell us a bit in your own teaching experience and collaborating with other researchers, how you see the relationship to local knowledge and community knowledge coming into the academy, and pathways for valuing that and mobilizing that within the university? So I'm thinking here in a lot of working class, rural communities or minority communities, when they come to university, their knowledge is discredited.
I think that's a great question, because let's say I think I've had the chance to work with colleagues who are from ethnic minority background and who are multilingual. It just, so English is maybe the third, fourth, fifth language that they use, and of course but they mainly publish in other languages, not necessarily English. So in conversation with those colleagues, I always have an impression that by them forcing themselves to publish in English, or by them being forced to publish in English by whatever policies that they have to follow, then make them feel like a lot of their knowledge production is lost, and lost in a sense that it's just they feel like they are not linguistically adequate in English to be able to produce a kind of knowledge they would love to. So I always see that dilemma, and then and then at the same time, as someone, of course, I don't speak English as a native speaker. I learned English at a quite in high school. I only started learning English at high school just as a school subject, and then I did my bachelor degree in Vietnam entirely in the medium of Vietnamese, and English it's just a subject that we took as a foreign language. And so so coming from that background, and then I understand a lot of conversation about chance languaging, chance culture, practices in writing, in knowledge production. So I talk to those colleagues about, actually, you can bring all different linguistic resources and knowledge sources into your writing in English. But then they all, and actually a lot of colleagues can have different ideas about that. Not necessarily that chance languaging work in the knowledge production level that they would love to see if they could just do it in the first two languages that they felt most comfortable and most natural in. So I think that raises many questions that we as scholars still need to examine or explore further if we were to be serious about knowledge production in a multilingual setting, because all the contexts that I have been with up to this point, I think they're all multilingual. But I can't deny the fact that English is dominant, totally dominant. and more policies, tend to make English even more dominant. So I see a lot of difference, or no, I wouldn't say difference, but I see a lot of gap between language scholars, language researchers, and what happens on the ground, and then the policy level, because the policy level may promote multilingualism, let's say may state the importance of multilingualism and of knowledge production in different languages. But a lot of mandate and the global university rankings, and then the push for publication in English totally counter the aspiration for multilingualism. And then people working at universities just feel like they are swimming in the middle of all these competing wants and aspiration by different parties. So I think that is a kind of sort of more of maybe a global universal phenomenon that I'm sure that you've seen it in Brazil and elsewhere. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And do you think that there are openings for a change in the way that we share our research, or share that we can produce dialogue amongst ourselves? Do you think there's potential for change there?
I think there are many dialogues already, but a lot of these dialogues are in English. Don't you think so? So I think then it still makes it difficult for, as I said, for many colleagues whom I mentioned earlier, that to participate and to feel like they can be members, and who could voice out their opinion in the way that they would love to be able to. It's not like they don't want to, but they still feel that English is not necessarily what they want to so-called produce knowledge in. So there is some sense of resistance. And then when they don't produce knowledge in English, then they don't get the recognition that they deserve. So I see a lot of that. Yes.
Yeah. Le Ha, could you just comment a little bit about your teaching and your students? Just tell us a bit about your teaching context.
So you mean here, like at the moment?
Yeah, in Brunei, yeah. I think you mentioned you have students from some rural areas.
So Brunei is a very small country. We have a population of less than 500,000 people, and I work with University Brunei Darussalam, that was established in 1985, so it's considered very young. So over the past few years, I have been offering different courses, but particularly one course I really enjoy. It is an undergraduate course for students majoring in sociology and anthropology. So it is called Education and Society in a Globalized World. So in that course, I am able to bring in a lot of, I would say, critical issues in language, education, society, and in the age of mobility, globalization, and transnationality. And so maybe I give it a little bit of background before I comment on like how students, coming from different backgrounds, probably engage or respond to those critical issues. So my university, probably in around 2011, introduced the Discovery Year program as a part of the 4-year curriculum at the bachelor's level. So basically, in the third year, all students are encouraged to go out there to discover the world. And then, so they have different options. They can travel overseas and spend like a semester, in a partner university or in an organization to do internship or to study abroad, something like that. or they can do some local community work inside Brunei, right? And so, or they can participate in some incubation program to develop an idea, like for a startup, for example. So as I said, there's a range of activities that they can do for 1 year. And so because of that curriculum, so basically I observed that my undergrad students are very aware of the mobility, so mobility is not something like a far or out of reach, because the university provides the infrastructure for them to be able to do that. But probably when introduced about critical issues related with mobility, and then my student became really, really engaged, and suddenly they realized that yes, there are issues of inequality, issues of access, right? Or what mobility means to in relation to immobility, for example. And then I think we had and then question about who counts as a citizen, as a permanent resident, and yes, and then suddenly, as I said, the whole, a lot of hidden issue that we don't normally talk in education, I think probably in many contexts, not just here, suddenly become like a pivotal in the way the student unpack their own experiences. So they started to reflect. So for example, some of my students spent a semester teaching English in Vietnam, right, during their discovery year. And then, but when I introduced to them, a lot of debate about, like who can teach English, for example, and the matter of qualification, and also kind of volunteerism, something like kind of yes, you can travel, you can do community work, but it also, and normally teaching English is often packaged with that volunteerism or volunteerism, that kind of notion. And then my students suddenly realized that, yeah, we've never been trained to teach English. We've never been trained to do that. And how come we could go there and do it for 6 months? It just it dawned on them that you cannot take it for granted. If you speak English, even if you were born with English, but if never been trained to teach others, then so you can't just do it, right? So as I said, a lot of really interesting reflection were expressed by my student, and then they realized that yes, you really have to place language in relation to many other factors, not just you being familiar with it. So I don't know if it makes any sense.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Le Ha. So what I would like to do, we're going to watch a short video. So Le Ha is a poet and a composer, as well as being an academic. And so we're going to, in the editing, watch a 5-minute video of a poem. So just before we do that, Le Ha, I wonder if you could introduce the poem, and then we're going to cut to the poem, and then I'll ask you some questions about how your own perceptions have changed over time, and ideas about memory, which I think are part of this poem. So could you just introduce the poem briefly, and then we will skip ahead to those questions.
But thanks so much, Joe. I think it is such a sweet moment. I think I feel really emotional and really appreciative that you asked me to do this. So yes, I love writing poems. I don't know, poems seem to come quite natural to me. So this poem is called Câu chuyện Hoa Ngọc Lan, like the story of Champaka flowers. I wrote this poem for my mother. She visited, when I was working in Hawaii, she visited us And then I often walk with her, in the late afternoons, almost every day. And then and then one day suddenly I saw my mom kind of, it looks like she recognized something familiar. And then she just asked me, "Are there champaka flower tree near here?" I said, and then suddenly, I realized that, yes, how come I could forget that thing? Because those flowers were part of my memories in Hanoi, where I come from. And then I told my mom, yes, I can smell it. It's everywhere in the air. And then my mom just recognized some champaka flower trees, on the side, on the one side of the street, and she just rushed there. And then she was just leaning herself towards one, and then I just saw her kind of lost in that moment. And then I was really emotional seeing my mom like that, and I saw a different her, like kind of she, and then I felt like she was reliving her young days, kind of imagining something of the past. And then I wrote that poem for my mom, and then I also realized that being a transnational scholar, I think that term sounds really nice, transnational scholar, but actually it carries a lot of homesickness always. So I think that that particular poem, I felt like it carries all different kinds of emotion, and as well as a sense of, I feel like a sense of not being able to see my mom for many, many years. Yes. So, and then I question, of course, in my mind, I question what is the purpose of living transnationally? Yes. So I don't know. We can talk a lot about that. Yes.
Thanks, Le Ha. So we will insert the video here in the recording.
Câu chuyện Hoa Ngọc Lan. Đường về nhà tôi có 2 hàng ngọc lan. Khi mẹ qua thăm, tôi với mẹ hay thả bộ và cùng dừng lại hít hà mùi hương. Tôi ngỡ đã để quên ở Hà Nội ngày nào. Chợt bồi hồi theo tiếng gió vờn mây trên cao. Dáng mẹ mềm trong bóng chiều đang đổ. Một thoáng xúc động ngân ngấn nơi khóe mắt. Tôi biết mẹ đang mở lòng mình cảm nhận chút bâng khuâng mơ mộng của những ngày xưa mẹ ít khi nào thổ lộ. Tôi lặng ngắm mẹ, trong lòng vẩn vơ. Chắc mẹ nhớ lắm. Mái tóc dài một thủa, giày đen là thế, cho hết cả vào con. Tựa gốc ngọc lan, dáng mẹ trẻ lại. Chắc mẹ khi ấy cũng rất nhiều khao khát. Bàn tay búp măng đến giờ vẫn đài các. Nụ cười ấy ai mà không sao lòng. Nét tươi tắn hình như không có tuổi. Con đường nhỏ sao hôm nay im ắng. Mẹ và tôi tha thẩn nhặt hoa rơi. Hai người đàn bà rong chơi. Tôi trêu mẹ, mặt nhau cười. Mẹ vui. Từ gốc lan, mẹ rộn ràng thủ thỉ. Dịu dàng ùa về thổn thức ngày trẻ. Những cơn gió nhẹ, dịu dịu mong manh, đưa hương ngọc lan bồng bềnh quanh mẹ. Tôi chợt giận mình vì không biết vẽ. Bởi lúc này đây mẹ của tôi đẹp quá. Cái đẹp những đứa con cứ mãi lớn vô tình ít nhận ra. Con đường nhỏ sao hôm nay im ắng. Mẹ và tôi tha thẩn nhặt hoa rơi. Hai người đàn bà rong chơi. Tôi trêu mẹ, mắt nhau cười. Mẹ vui. Từ gốc lan, mẹ rộn ràng thủ thỉ. Dịu dàng ùa về thổn thức ngày trẻ. Những cơn gió nhẹ dịu dịu mong manh, đưa hương ngọc lan bồng bềnh quanh mẹ. Tôi chợt giận mình vì không biết vẽ. Bởi lúc này đây mẹ của tôi đẹp quá. Cái đẹp những đứa con cứ mãi lớn vô tình ít nhận ra. Đường về nhà tôi có hai hàng ngọc lan. Khi mẹ qua thăm, tôi với mẹ hay thả bộ và cùng dừng lại hít hà mùi hương. Tôi ngỡ đã để quên ở Hà Nội ngày nào. Tôi ngỡ đã để quên ở Hà Nội ngày nào. Câu chuyện Hoa Ngọc Lan.
And so we've just watched the video. Le Ha, it is a beautiful video, beautiful poem in Vietnamese. And I wonder if you could talk about just, I guess, the themes in the poem it's about your changing perception of your mum. And I just wondered if you could talk a bit about how your perceptions have changed over time in general, as you mentioned, as somebody who is transnationally mobile, how that journey from Vietnam to Australia to Hawaii to Brunei, I guess what kind of shifts in your thinking that journey has provoked?
I think, wow, that's a big question, but I feel like, home is always present in me. I find myself very often very homesick. But at the same time, I must admit that probably in the earlier days of living transnationally, I was very fascinated and attracted to a lot of beautiful and great meanings associated with the term. So, that means, your the transnational aspiration, there's no need to be attached to one particular national space. You can, of course, the whole world is yours. So you can live and work and dream transnationally. So I think those kinds of ideas, I must admit that were and remain very, very attractive to probably to many of us. But at the same time, I must say that I feel like, it's a kind of, I'm often floating. I feel that floating in a sense that, just to give you a very specific example. A few days ago, I was listening to an academic talk entirely in Vietnamese, and I was so much admiring the Vietnamese used by the speaker, so much so that I felt terrified. And I'm losing the Vietnamese that I was growing up with. And so and then that sense was so real, so powerful, so true, that I could suddenly, that is another layer of I think going together with transnationalism or transnationality. Yes, and so doesn't matter how much people may want to celebrate the term or the many aspirations going with it, but for me, I see that language plays such an important role in the experience of transnationally mobile people like myself, like you, for example. Yes, and then I just I just miss speaking Vietnamese the way that speaker could do right in front of me, and I was there for 2 hours just listening totally attentively, and I just love it so much. So I don't know how to explain it further, but you did ask me how, right? So yes, on the one hand, it was attracted to the many possibilities, right? Or the big term that people often use, is it Papadura, right? Because the social imaginary of that aspect of being transnationally mobile, but at the same time, missing the language and being able to articulate or to express myself in that level of that particular level. It's just something I feel that being transnational is taking it away from many of us rather than enriching us as we would love to see, and as a lot of theories and scholarly arguments seem to suggest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a kind of a certain enchantment about transnationalism at the same time as there is the critique of the neoliberal global university environment that seems to have only one set of ideas and one epistemology. And I wonder, in terms of your experience as a student and an academic in Australia, which is very much connected to US and European academic models and publishing, if your view of, I guess, intellectual priorities changed in Australia, and then after you left Australia. I mean, I know my interests and sense of what is important work changed when I moved from Australia to Brazil, for example.
I think I did notice some, definitely, at least in from my experience, I saw, I experienced a lot of changes. So definitely, I think even I were in Australia, probably at the peak of neoliberalism, right, and the commercialization of higher education. So we saw a lot of that, right? And so I think, and then the kind of conversation scholars normally had in Australian context about higher education or language and education was probably not the same as those in other contexts. So when I moved to Hawaii, and then I realized that social justice was I would say like a daily matter. So it was like my colleagues, student, and everyone, every other scholars that I came into contact with. It's just kind of the central concern of their work, their pedagogy, and their scholarship. And yes, and then I realized that in Australia, it's not like things like that didn't exist, but probably the frequency as well as the kind of attention paid to that was probably very little compared to what I experienced in the States, and also and then of course that really enabled me to probably to look at what I am doing and to figure out how to interact and how to engage with my student in a more productive way, but also in a more meaningful ways that really take into consideration a lot of matters, a lot of issues that matter most to them, and of course, and then I also found myself, kind of wanting to learn more and wanting to be, wanting to even to do different kinds of research, not necessarily what I was already doing in Australia. And so I think in Australia, even though of course we talk about multilingualism, right? But it was basically English, right? The kind of environment both of us were in. But in Hawaii, then Hawaiian language, it was also an official language. So many of my students, they speak Hawaiian, and then when my daughters learn hula, and then they join different hula schools, and then they learn Hawaiian language, because when you learn to dance and you learn to chant in Hawaiian language, and then that also kind of open up a whole new space for us and for me as a scholar of language to think about what I had been talking or in my writing, or writing about voice and writer identities and all of those things. Yes, so it is real. It's not something, not something distant, but something actually is real and close to you, because my students are the one who speak another language, but the language that are present in the very much in the educational context that we are in. It's not just like an international student who comes in and, okay, I speak Vietnamese in Vietnam, or I speak Chinese in China. No, but here is in Hawaii, you have students who speak that language in that, and that matters in that particular space. So I think that that helped me a lot. And then I hope that I was enriched by it, but yes, very much.
And I think Hawaii, but I mean, all of those contexts that we've been talking about are shaped by coloniality, and that's, in our field, obviously, that's a big issue that people are grappling with through perspectives that are post-colonial or decolonial. So I wonder what your thoughts are about critique that's framed by coloniality, and what your experience of coloniality is in those contexts, and your take on that.
Well, I don't know if
we wouldn't talk about theory, but here we are.
Say it again. I don't know
I promised we wouldn't talk about theory, but here we are with a big theory question for the end.
Okay. I don't know if I am qualified to comment on this, but I think I think I have a mixed perspective. I can say that because, yes, I think probably this relates to your earlier question about how I probably change or transform or grow or anything, being a transnational scholar, moving from one context to another. So I would say that when I was first introduced to critical theories, critical pedagogies and everything, I was wholeheartedly embracing. And I felt very, very much empowered. And I felt like, it helped those I would say, that those ideas, those bodies of knowledge help so much in bringing a lot of what I would love to bring in from within me and from the tradition that I had brought with me or I was raised within, something like that. And then as I sort of maybe read more work from scholars outside of education, let's say that. And then particularly like, let's say in history, in political science, and anthropologies. And then I also came across a lot of debate about coloniality, decolonization, decolonialism, lots and lots of things. And actually, and then I saw more, I came across more and more nuances about the way scholars approach the topic, and particularly in relation to local knowledge. And then I said, okay, I need to take a step back and to try to understand what those scholars try to argue about the politics of local knowledge, right? Because often when we talk about decoloniality, in a sense, of course, as I said, that's a big topic, so I feel that I'm inadequate to comment, but maybe just take a tiny bit of that, right? In my very simplistic understanding of the term and of the practice, I would say like, so there is often maybe an assumption that local knowledge is just, one thing. And local knowledge is probably equal to everyone in that space, but actually it's not true. Local knowledge is so hierarchical. And then, of course, it excludes many people in that population. So, right, so of course it is, it has a lot to do with power struggle within a local knowledge space, right? So when but at a global scale, it is often that, the global versus the local. And I find that very simplistic in a way. And so I would like to see more of the nuances about local knowledge, and then how different local communities actually unpack and address those hierarchies rather than just resisting the dominant global knowledge only. I don't know if it makes any sense.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think
Yes.
that's a really good angle of critique, actually. And what this is my last question. This is a very practical one, which I think will be helpful to our members in Brazil. So who do you think is doing interesting work in this space at the moment? If you were to recommend some authors that people in Brazil or elsewhere might read, what kind of work do you find interesting at the moment?
And of course, your work, right? Your work, right? Of course, right? But also, I think maybe since you asked, so recently, I was asked to read and endorse this scholar's work. Professor John Oregon from the UCL Institute of Education global English and political economy. So I must say that scholarly work of this nature doesn't come often a lot, right? It's just because it is very labor intensive. By John giving an I would say extremely thorough historical analysis of global English and its history with capitalism, right? And so I attended the launch, of the book a few months ago, together with some other scholars, and definitely if I remember correctly, one scholar in that book launch session made a really, I would say, very a powerful statement that in the field of applied linguistics or in studies of the English language, this is probably the third book that he would consider as a game changer, something like really make scholars even think about many important issues. So with Robert Phillipson's Linguistic Imperialism in 1992, right? And then Alastair Pennycook's English and the Discourses of Colonialism in 1998. And then and then probably the third one that really offer really, I said, extremely thoroughly documented historical account. And also that kind of examination really then challenges or kind of question a lot of scholarship that is in fashion right now. So I think maybe not many people necessarily would agree with some of the positions put forth in the book, but its merit, I think, is definitely there. And so I would invite, since you asked, so I think...
Yeah, I'm really glad I asked.
Is a yeah. I would I would highly recommend it. Yeah.
Le Ha, I would like to thank you very much for being with us, and I would just like to end by mentioning another scholar from Vietnam who was also transnationally mobile, Ho Chi Minh. He spent time in Rio de Janeiro, as well as many other places, mainly Paris. And so I would like to invite you to continue this conversation with colleagues in Brazil, following in the footsteps of Ho Chi Minh. Thank you.
That would be my honor. Of course, I said I really enjoy our conversation so far. I just don't know, once I talk, I just talk. I don't know if I make any sense, but hopefully you enjoyed it. And I look forward to many more conversations. And of course, I would love to, to have the opportunity to talk and interact with colleagues in Brazil. Definitely. Yes. Thank you.